Welcome to another edition of Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Ron Kramer, Professor of Sociology at Western Michigan University, and I'm joined by my two regular commentators. On my right is Regena Nelson, who's in the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Educational Studies. Got to get the order right there, don't I? And Don Cooney, of course, is in the School of Social Work at Western Michigan University and also serves as a Kalamazoo City Commissioner. Well, good to have you both here, and what I thought we might try to do today is to help people sort out some of the legal cases that are ongoing. There's the old line that in a ballpark you can't tell the players without a scorecard.
Right.
And I think we can't tell the lawsuits without some kind of a scorecard here. So let's see if we can try to provide that today for folks. There are lots and lots of cases going on. Of course, mostly we're focusing on the former president and his legal troubles, because most of the major lawsuits that we want to talk about today concern him in one form or another. And there's sort of another theme here, and that is the powerful being held to account, whether it's the former president, a Supreme Court justice, the Fox News Corporation. There are lots of ways in which those who hold a lot of power in our society are being handled and dealt with through legal cases, which is sort of unusual. Teaching courses on white-collar crime and corporate crime and government crime, I can tell you that it's not often that those who hold great power in society are held to account in the legal arena. So some of this is a little unusual. Well, where do we begin? There are so many cases out there. I thought since the Dominion lawsuit against Fox News has already now been settled, that maybe we would start there today, because we do have some concrete outcome in that case. If you remember, the lawsuit was by Dominion Voting Systems, and their lawsuit was against the Fox News Corporation because they argued that right after the election in 2020, Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell and Mike Lindell and all these folks that were sort of on the Trump team kept basically spewing lies about Dominion, saying that there had been massive voter fraud. That's why Trump lost the election. None of that was true. None of this is true, by the way, at all. And yet they kept saying that part of the problem was Dominion and its machines, its voting machines, and somehow these voting machines had been rigged to flip votes from Donald Trump to Joseph Biden. And again, this is completely false. There's no evidence whatsoever that any of this occurred. And yet, Fox News was allowing these people to come on the air and tell these monstrous lies. And Dominion said, this is defamation. This is defamation. You are hurting us. You are injuring our corporate reputation, and you're going to cost us a lot of money by your reckless, false allegations. And so that was the basis for the lawsuit. And so what happened, Don? Did they go to trial?
No, they didn't go. Last minute, they settled for an enormous amount of money. 700 and how many?
$787.5 million.
Yes. Which the highest before that was something like $25 million or something. So a monster leap.
And Dominion was asking for $1.6 billion.
Yeah, so they got about half, right? They got about half. So, but one of the disappointing pieces is that Fox News didn't admit any wrong. They didn't apologize. They didn't say that we would do a retraction on camera or anything like that. So they got the money, Dominion did, but they didn't get the apology. And the apology, I think, would have been for the country the most important thing. So we ended up with halfway. But then Dominion says, look, they're not going to give us all that money if they don't acknowledge that they've done something wrong. If they had a case, they would have brought it forth. So there's some consolation in that.
I think Fox did have to acknowledge that in fact some of their statements were false. They didn't have to broadcast that on air or make a formal apology, but I think in their statement they did have to acknowledge because the court had ruled, right, Regina, the judge had actually made a ruling that these things were false, right?
Exactly, and I think what they were being protected under was that what's the intent behind it, because you can say things and you can think that they're true as a mistake, and then that's not the issue. But if the intent is malice or something like that, that's when it becomes a legal issue, and that's what they were trying to prove. And they had evidence that these reporters knew that this was not true.
Right.
So, yeah.
They got a hold of a lot of emails, right, where they explicitly said, you know, this is ridiculous, this is not true at all. And yet they would go on television and say the same thing. Right.
They would allow the Trump people to come on and tell these lies, even though behind the scenes in emails to each other and to their production teams, they were basically saying, well, this Sidney Powell is really crazy, you know, and Rudy Giuliani doesn't, you know, and they would ask Giuliani, they had some actual emails or phone recordings where they had asked Giuliani, you know, well, what's your evidence? Where are you going to be able to present some evidence about this? And, well, you know, I don't really have any evidence about that particular and of course they didn't have evidence of any of it as it turned out. And so a defamation lawsuit like this against a newspaper or media corporation like Fox, there's sort of a two-pronged principle here. Number one, the statements that were made have to be false, right? And in that case, there was no doubt about that. In fact, the judge at one point issued a ruling saying it is crystal clear, and he had crystal in all caps. It is crystal clear that these statements were false. These statements that Fox News allowed to be aired or were made by Fox personnel were false.
Yes.
And so that was his formal finding, that these statements are false. But that's not enough for defamation. You have to have a second part to it, which is to prove actual malice. That not only Fox made false statements, but they intended to make these false statements, that they had some malice. And so that's what the trial was going to be about, that part to show the actual malice, because he had already ruled that the statements themselves were false.
So one of the things was that they switched their story, because originally they had acknowledged that Trump had lost, but then they began to lose people watching their show, and they moved it. Is that not evidence of malice? They deliberately said, look, we know this is, they didn't say this, but in some senses they did. We know this isn't true, but hey, we're losing people out here and we got to get them back. That seems like pretty strong evidence of malice to me.
Yeah. They were losing audience and losing money. Right?
And losing.
Exactly.
If your audience share goes down, you're not going to be able to charge your advertisers as much. And of course, there's several competing right-wing media outlets out there, and they were pulling the people away. And Fox News just said, we're bleeding people here. Our folks want us to tell them that the election was rigged, even though it wasn't. Our folks want us to tell them that, so we've got to tell them. We've got to support their reality bubble, or irreality bubble, and we have to reinforce that, or we're going to lose them and we'll lose money, and therefore we have to change our tune here, as you say, and make sure that we're telling them what they really want to believe. Even though it's not true, we're going to tell them what they want to believe.
Which I think many of the other news outlets were very concerned, because they're concerned about credibility. I mean, why should anybody believe us? Why should anybody pay any attention to us if we don't have some measure of accountability? So I think they were very disappointed that they didn't get more out of that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were hoping that at the trial we were going to get Rupert Murdoch to come in and have to testify and be examined by the Dominion lawyers. And wouldn't have that fun to, we probably wouldn't have been able to watch it, but we
Right,
might have
right.
been able to read the transcripts of it later on and get reports on it.
Yeah.
Or Tucker Carlson.
Right.
Oh,
Or, you know, any of these other
Hannity.
Fox personalities. And so, again, basically Fox News is not a news corporation.
No.
They really don't report news. They're a propaganda
That's right.
outlet. And so they present right-wing propaganda to a particular audience that loves to be fed this right-wing propaganda because it reinforces their ideological beliefs. And so Fox is going to be able to make a lot of money by providing that propaganda to the audience that's primed for it. And if they actually start allowing real facts to come in, and those facts are, you know, basically challenging the ideological beliefs of their audience, then that's not good for the business model of Fox. And so, and again, what I'm saying here is not really anything radical or new. I mean, this was basically what was revealed
Right.
in the emails, right?
Yes.
The discovery process prior to trial had essentially forced out all this information. And we actually can read the Fox News people basically saying the exact same thing. You know, we can't present them real facts, or we can't allow a fact checker. In fact, some fact checker had basically checked with one of the statements that Sidney Powell or Rudy Giuliani had made and came back and said, we can't, you know, that's false. We can't allow that to go on air. And Tucker Carlson tried to get that fact checker fired. You know, get that person out of here. We don't want to deal with facts.
Right.
We got to go back to pumping out the propaganda to keep our audience hooked on the storyline that they want to hear.
So one of the things that disturbed me a lot was 2 days later, there was a full-page ad in the New York Times by Fox, and it said, which news station do people trust the most? And they had 47% of the people trust us, Fox, and everybody else was in the 20s. Now, I'm not sure that's not true. I mean, I don't think it made much of a difference to the people that were watching Fox.
Right.
What happened here? Because, as you say, Fox is what they want to believe, and they're going to grab that onto that, which is, to me, really disturbing.
Yeah. And did Fox air any stories about the settlement?
That's right.
Oh,
No.
did they? I didn't know. No, did they?
No, that's what the other news outlets are reporting, so that they
yeah.
did not, yes.
They had their media
Like,
guys, whose name is Howard Kurtz, I guess. And at some point he was talking about it, and he even said something about, well, there's a dollar figure that's been involved in the settlement, but we're not going
Right.
to report that because we haven't been able to confirm it. Your company's lawyers are the
Right.
ones who, and
Yes.
management are the ones
Right.
who agreed to it, and you can't confirm internally what that. And then he said something about. He did say something about though that the charge was that certain statements that were obviously false, and they were false or something like. So he did make that admission, which of course you almost have to at that point. So $787.5 million settlement, that's a huge amount of money, and it's a clear admission on the part of Fox that they were engaged in a process of producing falsehoods, and that they were allowing people to come on and say things about Dominion voting systems that were not true. But this isn't the end of the story. There's other things that are going on. Regina, do you know some of the other things that are happening with regard to the?
Well, you know, there's another suit that's out there by Smartmatics for they're asking for at least $2.7 billion
$2.7 billion.
in damages. Wow. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's due to looking at the statements made by Giuliani and Sidney Powell, those lawyers for Trump, and what they were also saying about the election. So it remains to be seen how this one is going to be handled.
Yeah. It'll be very interesting now that the precedent's been set of a huge settlement by Dominion. If Smartmatic is going to also be able to get a huge settlement, or whether they'll force it to trial. If Fox says, no, we gave that to Dominion, we're not going to do that to you, and again, will they then want to have to go to trial? And I think that Dominion has individual lawsuits filed against Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and Mike Lindell,
Yes.
the pillow guy. because of the statements that they were making about Dominion. So it's not over, but the big tussle that everybody was kind of anticipating watching this trial and seeing how things unfolded at the actual trial.
Murdoch, that would have been the big thing. Murdoch, getting Murdoch on the stand.
Yeah, and that's or Tucker Carlson and
Yes,
you know,
yes.
Sean Hannity, some of the big personality stars at
that would have
Fox.
been fun.
Just have them come in, and we have their emails, but it would have been probably interesting to actually hear what they would have to say under oath at a trial in front of a jury looking into this matter. So. Well, the Dominion case, so it's not over, but the first round has definitely been a huge defeat for Fox and of course, a defeat for Trump. Because again, now with this lawsuit, what we've had put out there repeatedly as this gets covered is that the statements that were being made about the 2020 election being stolen from Trump were not true.
Right.
Over and over and over again.
Right.
We keep hearing that what the former president has been saying about the election is not true. And in fact, these false statements just got his favorite news corporation into a huge amount of trouble because they allowed those things to be aired. Now they're paying out millions and millions and millions of dollars because they aired these false statements. So that certainly, as Trump ramps up his campaign for 2024, again, does that matter? Now, it probably doesn't matter with that hardcore Fox audience.
Right.
Because I don't think anything is going to break through the bubble.
Right.
They're so deeply encased in this bubble that I don't think any kind of factual information gets through to them. But if we're looking forward to a general election in 2024, what about other voters that are out there? So in particular, I think the Republicans are worried about the independent voters.
Yes.
That would often be convinced to vote Republican. Maybe these are more conservative, suburban, white families, the soccer moms of the past or whatever. Well, I guess we had a little technical glitch, but we're back. And I think we were pretty much done talking about the Dominion lawsuit settlement with Fox News. And we wanted to move on to some of the other legal cases that are out there. The next most important one, I think, where we actually have something concrete happening is in New York City. The district attorney in Manhattan, Alvin Bragg, has handed down, after consulting and presenting evidence to a grand jury, has had the grand jury return several indictments against the former president, Donald Trump, for problems with financial disclosures, right?
Yes.
So, Regina, what's this case all about? You remember?
Yes, I do. So there's the evidence shows that there was hush money paid to Stormy Daniels to keep her quiet during the election, and because of how the money was accounted for, it violates certain election guidelines and funding guidelines, and so that's one of the things that we're looking at. We know that there are other cases that have been out there where politicians have given money to people to be quiet, but they had to show that secondary intent of it was trying to influence the election, and they have that evidence. And so here we are now, waiting for this case to be tried.
Now, was there more than that in the indictments? Weren't there other business falsifications in it too?
Yes. There's 34 altogether, exactly. So there's a lot of other business issues and accounting issues that were also looked at as well.
And to upgrade, there's making a false financial statement is a crime, but generally it's a misdemeanor in New York. And but Bragg has charged these as felonies. To upgrade them to felonies, you have to show that these financial improprieties were in furtherance of another crime or another legal violation. And so what Bragg has been arguing is that there are two things here that were going on. One is a violation of election laws. Election laws in New York and the federal election laws were violated because this hush money that was being paid to the porn star to keep her quiet and not speak out about this right as the election was occurring in 2020, that was a violation of election laws, right? That this was this money was being paid to basically influence the election, right? So that was one thing. The second thing is that the money was being paid by Michael Cohen, who was Trump's attorney, and they were hiding where this was coming from, and that for tax statement purposes, Cohen was, basically in on a conspiracy here. And so it was a violation of tax law as well to shield Cohen from having to pay taxes on this money that he's being reimbursed, right? That he had paid to the porn star and now was being reimbursed by Trump. So, and again, some people think that, well, this is a little bit of a novel legal theory to advance the misdemeanor charge to a felony in furtherance of these other crimes. And so I guess there's some, and it seems like the legal commentary is somewhat split about this, that some think, well, this is perfectly fine to do this. Others say, well, this is kind of a stretch. So we'll have to wait and see. But nonetheless, Donald Trump has been charged with 34 felony counts in New York and Manhattan, and had to travel to Manhattan to be arrested and fingerprinted and photographed and then arraigned on these charges. What was disappointing, I thought, was then the judge said, well, the next hearing in this case will be in December. December?
Right.
Oh my gosh, this is just, this was March when the arraignment occurred. And we can't move any faster than December to have another hearing. So, so anyway, this is going to be a long, drawn-out case. But the fact is that Donald Trump, the first time a former president has ever been indicted on criminal charges.
Right.
So it was very newsworthy in that regard. And Don, have you been following, how have the Republicans in the Congress been responding to this indictment?
They're saying, of course, it's all a witch hunt. It has nothing to do with Donald Trump. It's just about the election and trying to make him look terrible for the election. So there's nothing about justice in this, and the prosecutor's just a wild man, just going in a wild theory, and so that's what it's all about. Forget it.
And in fact, Jim Jordan, representative from Ohio, who heads up the House Judiciary Committee now, and has also created this special investigative committee to look at the what do they call it, the weaponization of government.
Yes.
So in the sort of the strange projection here, I guess you could say it is almost. What Jordan and the Republicans who control the House are doing is weaponizing the government to go after Alvin Bragg. And they've tried to subpoena Bragg. And again, this is the federal Congress, right, trying to interfere in a local prosecution. They don't have any oversight of what a federal prosecutor in Manhattan does. And they say, well, his office gets federal funds. Well, there may be some federal funds that are coming in for this project or that project, but the basic function of the office to investigate crimes, present the evidence to the grand jury, and secure indictments, that's not federally funded. That's a local government function in Manhattan. And so they're basically really trying to interfere with a local election, which is improper and maybe illegal. And yet that's what Jordan and the Republicans are trying to do.
So
and
it sounds like the Republicans are advocating more role for big government. That's kind of a switch here, isn't it?
Yeah. And in fact, Jordan went so far he was not having much success. Bragg basically said, no, I'm not going to respond to any subpoena. This is an ongoing case. I can't talk about this. You have no jurisdiction. No, I'm not going to respond to any kind of subpoena that you might issue. I'm not going to come in and talk about this. Then they decided, so much of this is just a political attack on Alvin Bragg, right?
Yes.
To kind of smear the prosecutor who dared to bring charges against the former president. And so they're basically running political interference for Donald Trump, right? To try to protect Trump and to, again, smear the prosecutor. And they went so far as to last week hold a hearing, a field hearing, they called it. Instead of being in Washington, D.C., they had a field hearing. They made a field trip up to New York City. And they held a hearing. Now, what was the purpose of the hearing? Well, to investigate crime in New York City. Because they're basically saying, well, since Alvin Bragg became the district attorney, crime has gone rampant in New York, and they brought in victims, and again, what the evidence shows is that none of this is true. I mean, actually, since Bragg has become prosecutor, crime has gone down. New York City is one of the safest large cities in the country. People were pointing out that, well, right in Jim Jordan's own district, Mansfield, Ohio, Little Mansfield, Ohio, which is near my hometown where I grew up, has a much higher crime rate, if you really look at it, per capita when you balance it out per population than New York City does. And that Columbus, Ohio, the largest city near Jordan's district, also has much higher violent crime rate than New York City when you look at it per 100,000 or per 10,000, however, whatever measure you want to adopt there. And so even that attack fell flat on its face, basically, because, again, New York City is not the most violent, not more violent than even Columbus, Ohio. So, but again, the purpose was not to really talk about crime, violent crime. The purpose was to smear Alvin Bragg and to try to bring him down and to protect Donald Trump. So that's where we're at with the House Republicans right now, trying to interfere in a local prosecution.
But we won't hear anything until December on this, huh? I mean, it looks like.
Well, the next hearing, as far as I can tell, is not going to be held until December. So, but there might be some other things happening in the meantime, right? Mr. Trump may be facing some other legal troubles. So where do we begin here? Because there are in fact, I think that to some extent, it was a bit unfortunate that the financial disclosure case involving Stormy Daniels was the first one to come out, because to some extent, I don't know if it's the weakest of the cases, but it clearly, while a violation of election laws is a serious matter, there are more serious things that are being investigated.
Yes, exactly.
And so, let's look at what some of these other investigations are. Well, let's start with what the Department of Justice is doing, right?
Yeah.
So the DOJ is investigating two things related to Donald Trump. What are they, Regina? What are we looking at?
Well, one is, his role in the January 6th insurrection, which was preventing the certification of Joe Biden's, winning of the election and his role in that. So we know that there are people who have information and evidence that Trump was directly involved, even though he's saying something different. So that's that one. And then in Georgia, when we were waiting for things to be counted, that he was also involved in influencing that election as well. And so that's also being investigated at this time. So those are two major things.
And then there's also that matter of the classified documents, right?
Yes. The Department of Justice went to the Trump people and said, look, you got some documents there, we want to get them back. They said, okay. And they said, well, they're all gone. We're sure we can certify that we've searched and they're all gone. And then they went down and found over 100 documents that were still there that they had overlooked somehow. So that what's in those documents and how come they were there, all that is still on the agenda.
So when Donald Trump was no longer president, right? January 20th, 2021.
21, right, 2021.
He's no longer the president, and any of the papers that he had in his possession that related to his presidency had to be submitted.
That's right.
To, there's a government agency that basically takes these papers and catalogs them and archives them, right? And so as soon as you're no longer the president, those things have to be handed over. Well, Donald Trump did not hand over quite a few documents and took them with him back to Mar-a-Lago, his Florida residence. And included among those were some classified documents.
Yes.
Again, not only was he not legally allowed to be in possession of any government documents related to his presidency, he clearly is not allowed to be taking classified documents.
Right.
So that was an additional aspect of this particular case. So not only is he squirreling away and taking off with documents that belong in Washington, belong in the archives, but now he also has included among those some very sensitive classified documents. And there had been some ongoing negotiations, as you indicated. Trump turned over some of the things. Then they claimed that they had searched and had everything, and it turned out that that was not true, and the Justice Department secured a subpoena. The FBI executed the search warrant, or search warrant rather, not a subpoena, a search warrant at Mar-a-Lago, and they discovered a number of these documents, including classified documents. And so so there's several charges that could be involved here. I mean, just taking the documents in and of itself was a law violation. But then attempting to obstruct justice, to lie to the FBI, to lie to the Department of Justice about what you had or didn't have, it constitutes another pretty serious charge.
Yes.
And depending upon what's in some of those classified documents, there could be even espionage violations that could be charged against Donald Trump. So we have two major cases that the Justice Department is investigating. As you mentioned, we're looking into what was Trump's role in the January 6th insurrection, what was Trump doing trying to stop the certification of the election. They were hoping that they could convince Mike Pence to not allow the certification of the votes from different states, and that somehow that could be thrown back to the states, and state legislatures could turn around and, despite what their people had voted, to make Donald Trump the president. So this was still kind of a Hail Mary kind of pass that Trump and his team were trying.
Right.
So again, what was Trump's role in attempting to stop the certification and to basically incite the insurrection?
Right.
So that's one of the cases that's being investigated, and then the documents case is the other one. Now, the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, said, these are, involves an investigation of the former President of the United States, and we want to make sure that this is handled in a non-political way. So he appointed a special counsel. Jack Smith is the special counsel who's been appointed. He is investigating both of these cases, and he will be the one to decide, and probably presenting evidence to federal grand juries. And if any charges are brought, it's going to be at the instigation of the special counsel and the special grand juries that are investigating these cases. Now, these have been going on for a long time, and a number of people are getting very frustrated. Are we going to do anything here? Time is ticking. We're now 2 years into Joe Biden's administration. The next election is looming on the horizon. Already, Trump has declared himself a candidate for 2024. The primary season will be upon us next year, early next year. And so, again, there's a sense of urgency that these issues be resolved in some fashion. And so, I don't know. My feeling is that this summer, Jack Smith is going to return indictments against Donald Trump. He's going to charge him in the documents case. I think he's going to be charged with obstruction of justice and violation of the Espionage Act. And with regard to the January 6th, I think, again, they're going to bring indictments saying that Trump incited the insurrection and also engaged in several other clear violations of federal law in the attempt to prevent the certification, interfered with the certification process. I do think that there's evidence to support charges in both of these cases.
Yeah.
And I think that Jack Smith, being an independent counsel, and given what we know about him, his reputation as an attorney and investigator, that I do think he is going to bring charges. When is the question? And my best guess is that sometime this summer, the special counsel's office will return indictments from those federal grand juries against Donald Trump.
Wow.
So what do you think about that?
Well, I think the obstruction of justice thing is pretty clear because they certified that they didn't have any more, and they clearly did have more, and they should have known that. That should have been clear. What is interesting to me is, why did Trump take those documents? What was going on there? What were was there something there that he did not want people to know? I wonder if that's the case, and if that's the case, if that's going to come out, where we're going to see that this would have been very embarrassing to him for people to know about this. So I don't know if that's going to happen or not.
Yeah, I think that's really an interesting question. Why take those classified documents? I mean, the worst interpretation that some people have come up with is that this was classified information that he was attempting to peddle, to sell.
Oh, wow.
You know, as another, you know, then this would be a clear violation of the Espionage Act, right?
We could forget about the campaign if they can prove that.
Yeah,
I think,
but we just don't know.
Right.
So what were in those documents? Why did he take them? Why did he not return them when he was asked to return them? Because he had a clear legal obligation to return these documents, and yet he didn't. And so I think that these cases are the most serious cases. I mean, I think these investigations, because they're at the federal level, because they involve an insurrection against the United States government, because they involve classified documents that relate to foreign policy, I think these are among the most serious cases.
Yes.
And if there are indictments in these cases, I really think if Trump were to go on trial and be convicted, that there would almost have to be prison time involved with the, you know, in response to these cases. But again, we just don't know. We're still, you know, so I guess at this point we're just kind of alerting people, hey, pay attention. This is looming out there. Something's probably going to happen to it in the next couple of months. We just don't know for sure. And again, a number of people, I think a number of Democrats in particular, are getting somewhat frustrated because the evidence seems so clear. We know so much about these cases already, as the information has come out, been reported in the media, documents discovered. So we know a lot about these things already. We know what happened with the January 6th insurrection. We had the congressional investigation of January 6th. That presented a ton of evidence last summer in its public hearings. So we know a lot about these cases. And of course now the special counsel has been interviewing witnesses and bringing people in, and so getting people to testify under oath. So I imagine that he is building a pretty substantial case. I can't imagine that after all this time, after all the information that's come out, given the length and the depth of this investigation, that it's not going to result in very serious felony charges against Donald Trump.
Now, former Vice President Pence is scheduled to testify, isn't he? And that will be very interesting to see what comes out of that. Of course, we won't know right away.
No, we won't know. But Pence basically is, again, he has to testify under oath. And he's the only one that can really testify as to what Donald Trump was telling him or ordering him to do on January 5th or the morning of January 6th.
Yes.
Right? And he was being asked to do some illegal things. And he was basically, and publicly he was saying, I'm being asked to do certain things that I'm not, you know, the vice president doesn't have the power to do these things. After consulting with several important conservative legal scholars, he basically said, I cannot do this. But Trump was pushing him very, very hard to do it anyhow. And so his testimony, I think, is going to be really, really important. although there's a ton of other evidence that has been accumulated by the special counsel at this point. But we just have to sit back and wait. But just people should be on alert. Something's probably going to happen in both of these cases
I agree.
sometime later this year.
Yes.
Now, the Georgia case, that's probably going to happen much sooner.
Okay.
I think, from what I've heard, Fani Willis, the district attorney or the prosecuting attorney in Georgia, in the Atlanta area, Fulton County, is probably going to bring an indictment much sooner than that, maybe in May. And again, if people remember, what this involves is, as Trump was attempting to overturn the 2020 election, he made a phone call to the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, in Georgia. And that's the famous phone conversation when he said, "Brad, I just need you to find me 11,760 votes," or whatever.
Right.
He gave a very specific number, the exact number of votes he needed to win Georgia, right? And so he was basically pressuring the Secretary of State. And there were other people on that phone call with Trump, attempting to pressure the Secretary of State to take some kind of action to basically say, I'm going to have to, basically rule that some of these votes are not legal. And, and again, what Trump was hoping to do was to create a situation where it would go to the Georgia legislature, heavily Republican Georgia legislature, to decide who gets the electoral votes of the state of Georgia. Is it Biden, who won the popular vote? And Raffensperger basically certified and said, yes, Biden won the election. He gets Georgia's electoral votes. Or Trump was basically trying to say, let's throw that out and allow the Georgia legislature to decide who gets these electoral votes. So this is an interesting case. Also, I think a very serious case. So, to me, what the Department of Justice is doing and what Fani Willis is doing in Georgia are much more serious, much more consequential than Alvin Bragg's investigation in Manhattan. As serious as that is, and of course there were clearly legal violations that took place there, but it seems like these cases to me are much, much more important to deal with.
I would agree. I would totally agree with that. Right. These are major kind of things. Wow. So he and the January 6th thing, I don't know where this comes in about. His whole goal was to get the whole election back to the legislatures, right? Not just in Georgia, but in other states too.
Yeah, Georgia alone wouldn't have won the election.
Right.
So he had to get other states, Arizona, for example, Wisconsin,
Michigan. He was pushing Michigan.
Michigan,
do recounts.
Pennsylvania. Yeah. The hope was, because you had Republican legislatures in those states, right?
Yes.
Pennsylvania, Michigan at that time, Wisconsin, Arizona, and the thought was that if he could get the election thrown back to the state legislatures, that they would then send a different slate. And again, here we also have Trump and his team had created fake slates of electors in all those states. These were people that were not. I mean, it had already been certified in all these states that Joe Biden won the vote in that state. And so his electors were the duly authorized electors whose votes were going to count in the Electoral College and would be certified on January 6th.
Right.
And what the Trump administration tried to do was to create false electors for Donald Trump and to claim, well, these are the real electors.
Right.
In fact, if you remember, here in Michigan, they showed up at the State House and tried to get in, and the security guards wouldn't let them in. Say, well, we're the duly authorized electors, and we need to go in and do our business, which is to cast our electoral votes for Donald Trump. And no, the electors are already in there. The real electors are already in there for Joe Biden, and they're doing their work. And you guys are not legal. You guys did not win the election. You don't have any business being in there. But that happened in state after state after state. And in Georgia, I think Fani Willis is also making that a part of her investigation, the creation of a slate of fake electors in Georgia that attempted to do the same kind of thing.
Right.
So that was the plan, and it could have worked. I mean,
Yes.
if Mike Pence had gone along, I mean, he could have created enough confusion that if the electors had not, if the Electoral College results had not been certified, we would have been thrown into kind of a vast confusion as to what would be the next legal step here. Clearly, Pence did not have the power to do that.
No.
But what if he did it, and then the Trump people took it into court? I mean, I think Trump eventually thought, I can get some kind of case to go to the Supreme Court and win, because I have support in the Supreme Court that they'll basically authorize. Although I'm not sure that was the case. I mean, there were several instances where the Supreme Court did not go along with some of the legal challenges that Trump made. So even that effort might have failed. But we would have been in a very severe constitutional crisis had Pence given in, or if any of this any of these electors have been thrown back to the states to be decided.
Yes, I think with the damage that would have been done to the country at that time, I mean, it would have been really, really tough. But I think some of the Republicans like McConnell saw that this was a really bad move, and we can't go that way. So I think that helped a lot too. Yeah, but these are strong cases, and I think he's in big trouble with this.
But we'll have to wait and see. So stay tuned. We'll obviously have to revisit this at another point later this year when we get some results. There are several other cases out there. In our remaining time today, maybe we can look briefly at some of the other legal cases that are going on. One of them is a civil lawsuit that's been filed by a woman named E. Jean Carroll against Donald Trump. And E. Jean Carroll alleges that Donald Trump raped her, I think back in the 90s at some point in a department store in New York City. And so she has come forward in more recent time to basically make this allegation. Trump responded by sort of viciously attacking her, and she responded with a lawsuit saying that not only did Trump rape me, he then defamed me by responding to my allegation. And so she has filed a federal civil lawsuit, and that case is scheduled to go to trial April 25th in the
next week,
Southern District of New York. So this is another interesting case, and Trump has been trying very hard to wiggle out of this case, to get it delayed, and of course he probably won't appear in person for the case, which he's not required to do in a civil lawsuit. And so again, but this is going to get huge attention, media attention next week when this case begins. And again, while this is really a very important and serious case, right? This woman's allegations of being raped by Trump and then being defamed by Trump are really serious matters. Again, it serves to deflect attention away from what I think are the more serious national issues, right? Which have to do with the attempt to overturn a free and fair election in the United States, an insurrection. And the document cases, if there's obstruction of justice and espionage violations. So to me, again, not to repeat myself, I guess, yes, to repeat myself, I think what Jack Smith is doing as a special counsel is the most important and consequential investigation. But again, it's not the only investigation that's going on, and so this case is going to be going to trial as well. A couple other cases that we might briefly mention that are tangentially related to Donald Trump. One of them has to do with the decision that was made in a federal district court in Texas about the abortion pill. Regina, what was decided in this case?
So there's a judge who is ruling that that the FDA approval for this drug was done inappropriately, and so it's Yeah.
some years ago, right?
Yeah, 20 years ago. And it has been used, and there's not evidence that women are being harmed by it, not a substantial women. I mean,
Right.
like beyond what would be predicted for side effects for any drug. So it is safe. There's evidence that it is safe. But because we do have these anti-abortion groups, they're using this as a way to restrict abortions again. So that was the first. And then Washington State, there was another judge that ruled that was not acceptable. So we're in a holding pattern because now it's gone to the Supreme Court to make a decision today. So the deadline was extended to today, Friday at midnight, to see what the Supreme Court will say about the use of this drug. And the thing is, they could make a decision to restrict all use of it, which would be devastating because over 50% of abortions are handled with this drug, and it's also used for miscarriages and other things, and that impact women's health. So it is something that we do not want to happen. Or it could be that we restricted being mailed, because that was the other issue, that this pill can be mailed to people, and it can also be prescribed by non-doctors. So I think that was a fear that they're not winning this battle for anti-abortion with this pill out there. So we're waiting to see what the Supreme Court will decide regarding the use of this pill. Yeah.
And so many different angles on this. A judge ruling against a judge who has no training in science is ruling against people whose whole job is to investigate these things. And 20 years ago,
Right.
that there are, as you said, there's no evidence that
Right.
there. That's one thing. The second thing was that in the invalidation of Roe versus Wade, the idea was that we're going to let the states decide. Now, all of a sudden, it's going to be in the federal district to decide, to take the power away from the states to decide. So, yeah, those are a couple things that are out there on it.
And this judge in particular, they shopped around to find
Right.
the most radical judge,
Right.
a judge that they knew would rule this way. This Matthew Kicksmerick is his name, I think, and actually sits in the Federal District Court in Amarillo, Texas. And they deliberately were able to file their suit there. Now, the judge's ruling about whether the people who brought the suit have legal standing is kind of a joke. I mean, because clearly none of these people had legal standing, as courts normally determine legal standing. And yet he gave this really odd ruling that somehow they did have legal standing, and then he made a further odd ruling that somehow he knew better than all the scientists who provided evidence to the FDA, and that a process that had occurred 20 years ago, and a drug that had been on the market for all that time and had been proven to be safe and effective for its medical purposes. So it's an odd case all the way around. And yet, here we are waiting to see, what about the 5 people on the court, the 6 people? Well, I don't think Roberts would go along with this.
No, I don't think
it's the
so.
other 5. What will they say? They
Yes.
ruled against, they overturned Roe last year in the Dobbs case. They seem inclined to rule against any form of abortion. Will they now also go along and ban this? Now, I have a feeling, and again, this is just mere speculation on my part, that at least one of those judges will also peel away and support Roberts and the other 3 on the court.
Maybe. Yeah.
Because this ruling would be so disruptive to the pharmaceutical industry.
Right.
Exactly, yes. The precedent that it would save, because then any drug, any vaccine, anything else could be on the firing line, and that would be tremendous problem for the pharmaceutical companies. And we're talking money now.
Yeah, we're talking
not
big
talking
money
principle,
now.
we're talking money.
Yeah. So big legal challenges could be brought well after the fact of a drug being approved by the FDA.
Yes.
So it's just very disruptive of the whole regulatory process, the approval process for drugs in the society. So the pharmaceutical companies are very much up on alarm, and they may have enough political sway they voice their disapproval, and that might be enough to convince one of the other justices. You know that Alito and Thomas will always vote against anything that has to do with banning abortion. So we know those two at least are completely gone.
Right.
What about the 3 Trump appointees? Well, we don't know about them.
Right.
They ruled against Roe v. Wade. They're all clearly strongly anti-abortion, but can one of them be swayed to, you know, be convinced that this is so disruptive to the regulatory process that this isn't the way to go? So,
Right. It will be interesting today.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Gee, but
and another case that we can just sort of mark here to look at, and we'll have to come back and report on it later, has to do with Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, the aforementioned Justice Thomas, because he has been charged with all kinds of, or there are all kinds of allegations that he has now failed to file required disclosure reports, that he has violated the Ethics in Government Act, that the Federal Judicial Ethics Conference will be looking into him. So we don't know, but
right.
so that's another one to keep an eye on. So, well, lots happening in the legal world having to do with Trump and his supporters, and so we've reported on some of those cases today. And again, so much of this is still sort of up in the air that we'll have to come back and look at it later. But hopefully we've at least allowed our viewers to have some idea about the lay of the land here. Again, can't tell the cases without a scorecard. Hopefully we provided that scorecard today for our viewers. And we hope that you'll come back and see us again here on Critical Issues Alternative Views. Thanks to Regina, thanks to Don, and we hope to see you again next time on Critical Issues Alternative Views.